Sup, ladies and gentlemen, Acklon here, and of course, welcome back to each and every one of you. Today we're going to be talking about a tower. And I know what you're thinking, Acklon, a tower? How can that be interesting? Well, this particular tower, I think, is of incredible interest to the lore, speculation, the future of the story. Of course, we are speaking about Vactros. Now, Vactros is a tower located within the Azure Span, and it should be on your screen right now. And if you look at the landscape around Vactros, it is decimated. Something came out of Vactros and destroyed a lot of the buildings surrounding the main tower, but also, effectively, I would argue, destroyed the realm itself. Now, I am in the game currently because there are a couple of things that I want to show you before we get into the massive speculation bits of this. And just a massive shout out, by the way, to, I believe it was Hector Howl over during the Q&A that brought this tower to my attention. And, you know, since then, it's really blown my mind. But nevertheless, there is a lot of things to talk about here. So before we get into it, I want to give a huge shout out to all of the patrons and the YouTube members and the Twitch subs of the channel. Thank you so much for your support. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it, shall we? Now, there is something very interesting about the Azure Span. First and foremost, you have to know that the Azure Span is the home of the blue dragons. It is, of course, here where Malygos found the prime nexus. What he would do with the nexus later on, he did it here. And I would argue that that is one of the main purposes of Vactros. One of the reasons I would argue this, now let's just first talk about what exactly is the nexus. The nexus is after the Dragonflights were locked out of the Dragon Isles, Malygos really required all of a space where all of the ley lines of Azeroth would coalesce. Now, in later years, this actually became a bit of a bad thing, because what Malygos actually wanted to do was remove all arcane magic from mortal hands and have it all coalesce within the hands of blue dragons. So the blue dragons would be the only ones that could use arcane magic. I argue that the Nexus was a carbon copy of Vactros, and that this was first done on Vactros, and not for the sort of bad means that the Nexus would ultimately become, but rather just as a way to exercise their great power. Remember, blue dragons have phenomenal power when it comes to ley lines, their ability to read and follow the ley lines, and also just use the power of the ley lines. So I believe that is one of the things that Vactros was originally meant to do. And my reason for that comes from the campaign. So while we're doing the campaign, we're told that if Razigath succeeds and destroys Vactros, it will take all of the Azure Span and most of the Dragon Isles with it. In other words, whatever power coalesces within Vactros is so great that it would be like setting off multiple atomic bombs at the exact same time. So it would rip the Dragon Isles apart. But I don't think that's all it is, because during the quest line, they make it seem that that's what Razigath wanted to do. Razigath wanted to destroy Vactros. But Vactros is interesting to me. There's something particularly of interest to me with the ice. The ice in the zone, as it were. Now, make no mistake, the zone really does give off those winter forest vibes, very much Grizzly Hills. But the location of the ice and the origins of the ice is what really sparked my interest. The ice in the zone is located and concentrated around Vactros. It seems to emanate from Vactros, and then it runs out. Once you get to about halfway in the zone, there's no ice. Yes, it still gives winter forest vibes, but the ice ends. And this is not just normal ice. Look at the blue. Like, the deep, dark blue of it. Now, you could argue, well, Akalon, that's probably just rivers. To me, it almost signifies an arcane element, as if something that was flowing from the tower was frozen in the process. So in other words, perhaps incredible amounts of arcane power flow from Vactros, and that was frozen on impact by something. And as you move further away from it, eventually that ice seems to dissipate. Another thing that makes me think that this ice is not natural is the patches in between the absolute permafrost that isn't frozen. There's patches all over that's completely unfrozen. And yet areas then that's completely barren permafrost, Borean tundra kind of shit. I don't believe this to be natural. There's another reason why I doubt the occurrence of this. And it's location, location, location. If you look at where we are now in relation to everything else, we are nowhere near the coldest parts of Azeroth. Yeah, you could say, well, Northrend is right there. Yeah, but Northrend is really perma-frozen at the top. The bottom areas, yes, it's cold, and yes, there's snow, but it's not permafrost, not this level of permafrost we see in the Azure Span coming from Vactros. The permafrost that we see coming from Vactros really is something that you only get in Storm Peaks and sort of, very much ice ground. Those were the only places. Dragonflight, like I said, does have ice, but nowhere near the same level. And where we are now, we're far closer to the Broken Isles, to Kultiris, than what we are to Northrend. So I don't believe that the ice here is natural. I'm not saying that it isn't cold here. I'm not saying that it can't be cold here. Of course it can. It's still in the north of the world, and, it is a pretty high, sort of high-laying area. I'm just saying the permafrost element of it is wild to me. It does not seem to fit with the location of the world that we find ourselves in. One more thing about the permafrost before we get into the true speculation here. If you look under the tower, it's lava. It's molten fire. That area should be boiling. That ice should be melting, and yet it isn't. It's still frozen after all this time. And this is where we get to the speculation. Something within that tower is emanating an incredible amount of cold. So cold, in fact, that the lava, the heat generated by lava and fire elementals isn't enough to unfreeze it. Now, of course, we know of a creature that does this in some way. Veranoth, one of the Primal Incarnates. We also know that there are incredible animosity between the Primal Incarnates and the Aspects. My question is, could this have something to do with that? It was one of the locations that Razigath went after. If we go over the Dragon Isles and we go through the campaign, there were a few places that Razigath focused her efforts. The first was the Obsidian Citadel. Not Razigath herself, but the Jordan, her allies, did move on the Obsidian Citadel, the seat of the Black Dragonflight. The other was the Onaron Plains, where Onara was Razigath's main focus. This makes sense. Onara, the goddess of the wind, Razigath, the Storm Eater, literally Primal Incarnate of air. Onara would be a very, let's say, welcome haul. And then the Azure Span, Razigath moves on Vactros, not on the seat of power of the Blue Dragonflight, not the Azure Archives. That's not where Razigath goes. If you track Razigath's movements, Razigath seems to identify places of power of her brothers and sisters. Perhaps things that's been stolen from her brothers and sisters. What if Veranoth, as the Primal Incarnate of water, What if Veranoth had a power source, and this was then taken away from her by the aspects and placed inside these prisons? The aspects very much seem to have taken the prison narrative. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the aspects. I just want to throw that out there. I'm more and more now starting to work my theories almost backwards, and I'm starting to think the aspects themselves might not actually understand why this war is happening the way that it's happening, because the aspects themselves might not even know what the Titans had done. My working theory at the moment is the Titan aspect, or the Titan Keepers, identified proto-dragons for experimentation. The first is the primal aspect, or the aspects that we know now. They were identified for an experiment fighting Galakrond. Upon their success defeating Galakrond, they were granted powers. This again was part of the experimentation. What does it look like when we infuse order magic into proto-drakes? The Primal Incarnates, on the other hand, were arrested and used in experiments of elemental magic. And the idea being, what does it look like when we supercharge these proto-drakes with elemental magic? And the Titan Keepers almost certainly would have done that. We know that they screwed with many powers far beyond the power level of the Primal Incarnates. Gohun comes to mind when they started experimenting on old gods to see what would happen if you infuse old gods and order magic. What on earth could go wrong? Right? So they're very... They like their experimentations, and I believe that's exactly what happened here. But when the Primal Incarnates proved to be incapable of control, and that their power levels would be too great, their power sources were taken away from them and imprisoned within structures of Titan design. Make no mistake, Vactros, when you look at it, it is a Titan-designed facility. This is what the Titan facilities look like. In fact, one could argue that most of where the Dragonflights live look very much like Titan-designed facilities rather than Dragon-designed facilities. And that bothers me. It means that not even the aspects know the full truth of what had happened. And then I'll leave you with one final idea. Braconite Hallow and the Ruby Shrine. There are two Primal Incarnates missing. What if the Primal Incarnate of Decay, or at least his power source, which I believe used to be Galakrond, but his power source, and then of course the Ruby Shrine, the Primal Incarnate of Spirit. What if they were imprisoned long before everything else? Think about the Ruby Shrine, the Ruby Life Pools. It is said that those waters flow with life. It's life magic that flows within those waters. That's what Spirit is. It's life magic. What if everything the Dragonflights hold dear is powered by Primal Incarnates, or at least Primal Incarnate magical sources? What if that is one of the reasons why the Incarnates loathe and hate the aspects so much? Not because they blame the aspects for what was done to them, but because they blame the aspects for their ignorance, for not realizing what was done to them, for not listening perhaps when they told them what was done to them, that they were used to power the Titan facilities. They were used to power Titan experiments. I'm not saying that that is what it is. I'm saying it's possible. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. So if you have any, please write them down. I do read all of the comments because it's always very interesting to hear what you guys have to say about it. Ladies and gentlemen, to all of the patrons, the YouTube members, and of course the Twitch subs, thank you so much for your monthly support. It does mean the absolute world to me. And as always, be kind to each other, be good to each other. And remember, if you want free hentai, podcasts, and just a boatload of other things that you will get nowhere else, for $1 a month over on Patreon, you can get access to everything. Ladies and gentlemen, take care of yourselves. Peace out, fam.